The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook, a sleepy town where nothing exciting ever happened. At least, that's what everyone thought, until two black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of Henderson Elementary School. The vehicles gleamed under the autumn light, their tinted windows hiding the occupants inside. 9-year-old Maya Johnson clutched her worn backpack straps as she watched from the playground fence. She had been standing alone again, like every day since her family moved to Millbrook 3 months ago. The other children played in their tight circles, whispering and pointing whenever she tried to join them. Her dark skin made her stand out in this overwhelmingly white town, and the isolation felt heavier each day. The SUV doors opened, and two massive figures stepped out. Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. She recognized them immediately from the wrestling matches she watched with her father every weekend. John Cena, with his distinctive buzz cut and powerful build, stretched his arms after the long drive. Beside him, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson adjusted his sunglasses and surveyed the small town with curious eyes. They had been traveling back from a charity event in the next state when their manager suggested they stop in Millbrook. The local community center had been trying to arrange a visit for months, hoping to inspire the town's youth. What they didn't know was how much this visit would change everything. Maya's heart raced. These were her heroes, the men who fought against impossible odds on television every week. She had dreamed of meeting them, but never imagined it could happen in her tiny new hometown. Slowly, she walked toward the fence that separated the playground from the parking lot. The wrestlers were greeted by the school principal, Mrs. Patterson, who looked nervous but excited. Behind her stood several teachers and a small crowd of parents who had somehow heard about the surprise visit. Word traveled fast in Millbrook, especially when it involved celebrities. As they walked toward the school building, John Cena noticed the little girl by the fence. Something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was how she stood apart from everyone else, or the way her eyes followed their every move with such hope. He nudged Dwayne and pointed in her direction. "Hey there," John called out, walking over to the fence. "What's your name?" Maya's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Maya Johnson, sir." Dwayne knelt down to her level, his famous smile warming his face. "Maya's a beautiful name. Are you excited about the assembly today?" She nodded eagerly, but her joy was mixed with uncertainty. "Will you really be talking to all of us?" "Absolutely," John replied. "We're here to meet amazing kids like you." For the first time in months, Maya smiled genuinely. She felt seen, acknowledged by her heroes, when her classmates barely recognized her existence. This moment felt magical, like something from a movie. But their conversation was interrupted by the roar of motorcycle engines. The sound grew louder and more aggressive as it approached the school. Maya's smile faded instantly, replaced by fear that John and Dwayne immediately noticed. 3 motorcycles pulled into the school parking lot, their riders wearing leather jackets covered in patches and symbols. The bikes were loud, modified to make as much noise as possible. The men riding them looked rough, with tattoos covering their arms and permanent scowls on their faces. The leader, a tall man with a shaved head and cold eyes, removed his helmet and surveyed the scene. His gaze lingered on Maya, and his expression darkened with unmistakable hatred. The other riders flanked him, creating an intimidating wall of leather and metal. Maya instinctively stepped back from the fence. She recognized these men. They were part of a group that had been terrorizing her family since they arrived in Millbrook. Her father had warned her about them, told her to run if she ever saw them coming. John and Dwayne sensed a shift in atmosphere immediately. The excited chatter from the parents and teachers died down to nervous whispers. Even the principal looked uncomfortable, glancing between the bikers and the wrestlers as if unsure how to handle the situation. The lead biker dismounted and walked toward the group, his boots heavy on the asphalt. 2 large German shepherds jumped down from side carriages on the motorcycles, straining against their chains and barking aggressively. The dogs looked well-trained but vicious, their eyes focused and hungry. "Well, well," the biker said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Looks like we got ourselves some visitors today." Maya pressed herself against the fence, her small hands gripping the metal links. She wanted to run, but her legs felt frozen. These men represented everything she feared about her new town: the hatred, the violence, the constant threat that hung over her family like a dark cloud. John and Dwayne exchanged a look. They had encountered difficult situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't about entertainment or scripted drama. This was real danger, and there was an innocent child caught in the middle. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Parents began pulling their children closer. Teachers whispered anxiously among themselves, and Maya stood alone by the fence, trapped between her heroes and the men who wanted to hurt her. Neither side backed down. The bikers revved their engines menacingly, while John and Dwayne positioned themselves protectively. Everyone knew that what happened next would change Millbrook forever. The lead biker, who introduced himself as Razor, strutted forward with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. His leather vest displayed patches that made John and Dwayne's blood boil, symbols of hate that had no place near a school, near children, near anyone. "I hear you boys are here to inspire the kids," Razor sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "That's real nice of you, but maybe you should be more careful about which kids you're inspiring." His eyes locked onto Maya, who was now trembling behind the fence. The little girl's fear was palpable, and it fueled the anger building inside both wrestlers. John took a step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller man. "Is there a problem here?" John asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Razor laughed, a harsh sound that made several children on the playground cry. "Problem? No problem at all. Just wondering why famous folks like you would waste your time with certain elements in our town." The principal, Mrs. Patterson, tried to intervene. "Gentlemen, this is a school zone. Perhaps we could." "Shut up, lady," one of the other bikers snarled. "Adults are talking." That was the moment Dwayne decided he had heard enough. His jaw clenched as he stepped beside John, forming an imposing wall of muscle and determination. The Rock had faced many opponents in his career, but none had disgusted him quite like these cowards who terrorized children. Maya watched in fascination and terror as her heroes positioned themselves between her and danger. She had seen them fight on television countless times, but this was different. This was real, and they were fighting for her. "Listen carefully," Dwayne said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're going to get back on those bikes and leave. Right now." Razor's grin widened, revealing yellowed teeth. "Or what? You gonna body slam me like in your fake wrestling matches? This is the real world, boys. Your Hollywood muscles don't mean nothing here." The German shepherds strained harder against their chains, sensing their master's aggression. They were beautiful animals, but their training had twisted them into weapons of hate. Their barking grew more frenzied as they focused on Maya. "Those are some nice dogs," John observed, his tone deceptively casual. "Shame they're being used by people like you." "These dogs know how to handle troublemakers," Razor replied. "They're real good at chasing off unwanted visitors, especially the kind that don't belong in decent neighborhoods." Maya's hand shook as she gripped the fence tighter. She had experienced racism before, but never with such direct and violent threats. The dogs seemed to sense her fear, their attention entirely focused on her small figure. Mrs. Patterson tried again to defuse the situation. "Mr. Razor, I really must insist that you leave school property. We have procedures." "Your procedures don't apply to us, lady," Razor cut her off. "We go where we want, when we want. And right now, we want to have a conversation with our new neighbors." He turned his attention back to Maya, pointing a grimy finger in her direction. "You tell your daddy that his kind ain't welcome here. Tell him we know where you live, where you go to school, where your mama works at the diner. Tell him we're watching." The threat hung in the air like poison. Parents began pulling their children away from the playground, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. Teachers whispered frantically among themselves, unsure whether to call the police or simply hide. But John and Dwayne didn't move. They stood their ground, two immovable objects facing down three men who had terrorized this town for too long. "You just made a big mistake," John said quietly. "Threatening a child, in front of witnesses, near a school." Razor laughed again. "Witnesses? You think anyone in this town's gonna cross us? You think the cops are gonna do anything? Boy, you really don't understand how things work around here." He was right, and everyone knew it. Millbrook had been under the thumb of men like Razor for years. The police looked the other way. Officials made excuses, and decent people stayed quiet out of fear. It was a system built on intimidation and silence. But that system had never encountered anyone like John Cena and The Rock. "Maybe it's time things changed around here," Dwayne said, cracking his knuckles. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to bullies who pick on little girls." The other bikers moved closer, forming a semicircle around the wrestlers. They outnumbered John and Dwayne, and they had weapons, chains, knives, and worst of all, those vicious dogs. Maya could barely breathe. She wanted to run, to hide, to make herself invisible. But something about seeing her heroes stand up for her gave her a small spark of courage. These men who entertained millions were risking themselves for one scared little girl in a nothing town. "Last chance," Razor said, his hand moving toward the dog's chains. "Walk away, and maybe we forget this conversation ever happened." John and Dwayne looked at each other. They had made their decision the moment they saw Maya's fear. There was no walking away from this. "We're not going anywhere," John declared. "But you are." Razor's grin disappeared, replaced by cold fury. His hand tightened on the chain, holding the German Shepherd's. "Wrong answer, pretty boys." The confrontation had reached its breaking point. Everyone present knew that violence was seconds away. The question was whether two wrestlers, no matter how strong or famous, could protect an innocent child from three dangerous men and their attack dogs. Maya pressed herself against the fence, her young mind unable to fully process what was happening. All she knew was that her heroes were about to fight the monsters that haunted her nightmares. The dog's barking reached a fever pitch. Razor's hand began to release the chains. Time seemed to slow as Razor released the chains. The two German shepherds lunged forward with frightening speed and precision, their training evident in every calculated movement. These weren't pets, they were weapons, conditioned to attack on command and show no mercy. Maya screamed as the first dog launched itself toward her, its powerful jaws aimed at her throat. But the animal never reached its target. John Cena moved with incredible speed for such a large man, intercepting the attacking dog mid-leap. His hand shot out and grabbed the shepherd's collar, using the animal's own momentum to redirect its trajectory. Instead of tearing into Maya, the dog found itself spinning through the air and landing hard on the asphalt several feet away. Simultaneously, Dwayne faced the second dog, which had been trained to work as part of a coordinated attack. As the animal charged toward Maya's legs, the Rock dropped low and caught it around the midsection, lifting the struggling dog and slamming it firmly, but not brutally, onto the ground. Both animals were stunned but not seriously hurt. The wrestlers had neutralized the threat without becoming the monsters themselves. "Call off your dogs," Dwayne shouted at Razor, who stood frozen in shock. Now, but Razor had lost control of the situation. His carefully orchestrated intimidation had backfired spectacularly. The dogs, confused and disoriented, whimpered as they tried to regain their bearings. For the first time in years, Razor's weapons of fear had been turned against him. The other two bikers, seeing their advantage evaporating, pulled out knives and moved to flank the wrestlers. Chrome, a wiry man with prison tattoos covering his arms, slashed at John's back while his partner, Tank, tried to grab Dwayne from behind. John spun away from Chrome's blade, the knife missing his spine by inches. His years of athletic training kicked in as he grabbed Chrome's wrist and twisted, forcing the man to drop his weapon. A devastating uppercut sent the biker sprawling backward into one of the parked motorcycles. Tank managed to wrap his arm around Dwayne's throat from behind, attempting a choke hold, but the Rock was prepared for such tactics. He drove his elbow backward into Tank's ribs, breaking the hold, then spun around and delivered a thunderous punch that lifted the biker off his feet. Maya watched in amazement as her heroes dismantled their attackers with a combination of skill, strength, and righteous fury. This wasn't the choreographed entertainment she saw on television. This was raw, desperate, and very real. Razor, seeing his men defeated, pulled out a pistol from beneath his leather vest. The sight of the weapon sent parents screaming and children running for cover. Mrs. Patterson herded students toward the school building while frantically calling 911 on her cell phone. "That's enough," Razor screamed, pointing the gun at John. "You think you're tough, guys? Let's see how tough you are with bullets in you." But Maya, in a moment of pure courage that surprised everyone, including herself, picked up a rock from the playground and hurled it at Razor's gun hand. Her aim was perfect, striking his wrist just as he squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, shattering a car window instead of finding its intended target. John didn't waste the opportunity Maya had created. He lunged forward and tackled Razor, driving the biker to the ground with bone-crushing force. The gun skittered away across the asphalt as the two men grappled on the pavement. Razor was strong and vicious, fighting with the dirty tactics of someone who had spent years hurting innocent people. He clawed at John's eyes, tried to bite his throat, and landed several hard punches to the wrestler's ribs. But John fought with something Razor couldn't understand: the determination of someone protecting the innocent. Every time Razor's fist connected, John thought of Maya's frightened face. Every time the biker tried to reach for a weapon, John remembered the little girl's courageous throw that had saved his life. Dwayne, meanwhile, had retrieved the pistol and was keeping the other bikers at bay. Chrome and Tank were conscious but battered, their confidence completely shattered. The German shepherds had retreated to their motorcycles, no longer interested in fighting. "It's over," Dwayne announced, his voice carrying across the school parking lot. "The police are coming, and you're all going to jail." Indeed, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Mrs. Patterson's call had finally gotten through to the authorities, though it had taken precious minutes that felt like hours. John finally pinned Razor to the ground, blood streaming from cuts on both men's faces. The biker's hatred hadn't diminished, but his power was broken. For the first time in his life, he faced real consequences for his actions. "You think this changes anything?" Razor spat, his voice filled with venom. "You think beating us up solves the problem? We got friends, boy. We got connections. This ain't over." Maya walked closer, no longer afraid. She looked down at the man who had terrorized her family for months, and she saw him for what he really was: not a monster, but a pathetic bully who only had power when other people were too scared to fight back. "It is over," she said quietly, her young voice carrying more authority than anyone expected. "Because I'm not afraid of you anymore." The police cars arrived with screeching tires and flashing lights. Officers poured out of the vehicles, weapons drawn, expecting to find a disaster scene. Instead, they found 3 defeated bikers, 2 bloodied but victorious wrestlers, and a 9-year-old girl standing tall with pride. As handcuffs clicked around Razor's wrists, he made one final threat: "This town belongs to us, little girl. You and your family better watch yourselves. We know where you live." But his words no longer carried the power they once had. Maya had learned something important that day. Bullies were only as strong as the fear they created. And she wasn't afraid anymore. The German shepherds were taken away by animal control officers who promised to find them proper homes with people who would train them to love instead of hate. John and Dwayne gave their statements to the police while paramedics tended to their cuts and bruises. As the excitement died down and the crowd began to disperse, Maya approached her heroes one final time. "Thank you," she said simply, "for protecting me." John knelt down to her level, wincing slightly from his injuries. "You protected us too, Maya. That throw you made, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Dwayne ruffled her hair gently. "You're going to be just fine, kid. And if anyone ever bothers you again, you tell them they'll have to answer to us." The arrest of Razor and his gang sent shockwaves through Millbrook that rippled far beyond the school parking lot. News vans arrived within hours, their satellite dishes transforming the sleepy town into the center of a national conversation about racism, bullying, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Maya found herself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. Reporters wanted to interview her, photographers tried to capture her image, and strangers on social media debated her story. For a 9-year-old who had just wanted to fit in, the attention was overwhelming. Her parents, David and Jennifer Johnson, had rushed to the school the moment they heard about the incident. David worked as a mechanic at the local garage, while Jennifer waited tables at Millbrook's only diner. They were hard-working, quiet people who had moved to the small town, hoping for a peaceful life away from the chaos of the city. "We thought a smaller town would be safer for Maya," Jennifer explained to a reporter, her arm wrapped protectively around her daughter. "We never imagined we'd face this kind of hatred here." David's face was grim as he spoke about the months of harassment his family had endured. Slashed tires, threatening phone calls, graffiti on our house. The police always said they were investigating, but nothing ever happened. Those men acted like they owned this town. The investigation that followed the school incident revealed the depth of the problem in Millbrook. Razor, whose real name was Raymond Peters, had been terrorizing minority families for over a decade. His gang operated with impunity, protected by fear and a network of sympathizers in positions of power. Detective Sarah Martinez, brought in from the state police to handle the case, uncovered a disturbing pattern of complaints that had been ignored or buried by local law enforcement. "We found dozens of reports that were never properly investigated," she told reporters. "Families driven out of town, businesses vandalized, children threatened. This was systematic intimidation." The most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that Razor's brother was a sergeant in the Millbrook Police Department. Sergeant Rick Peters had been feeding information to the gang, warning them when complaints were filed and ensuring that evidence disappeared before it could be processed. John Cena and The Rock, meanwhile, found themselves dealing with their own media storm. Wrestling fans praised them as real-life heroes, while critics questioned whether celebrities should involve themselves in local disputes. The wrestlers handled the attention with grace, consistently redirecting focus to Maya and the larger issues her story represented. "This isn't about us," John explained during a television interview. "This is about a little girl who found the courage to stand up to bullies. This is about a community that needs to face its demons and do better." Dwayne was equally thoughtful in his responses. "Maya threw that rock to save my life. She's 9 years old, and she had more courage than grown men who stayed silent for years. If that doesn't inspire people to examine their own consciences, nothing will." The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Razor and his accomplices faced a laundry list of charges: assault with a deadly weapon, making terroristic threats, animal cruelty, illegal possession of firearms, and conspiracy to commit hate crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, captured by security cameras and witnessed by dozens of people. But the real battle was happening in the heart of Millbrook itself. The national attention had exposed the town's dark secret, and residents were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their community. Some defended the status quo. Mayor William Hartley, who had been in office for 20 years, insisted that the incident was an isolated event blown out of proportion by the media. "Millbrook is a good town with good people," he declared. "We don't have a racism problem here." Others disagreed vehemently. Pastor Michael Williams of the town's only African Methodist Episcopal Church had been documenting incidents of racial harassment for years. "The mayor can pretend all he wants," Pastor Williams said, "but I've got files full of complaints from families who were driven out of this town by fear." The controversy deepened when old photographs surfaced, showing Mayor Hartley at social events with members of Razor's gang. While there was no evidence of criminal conspiracy, the images raised serious questions about how deeply the corruption ran. Maya tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed. At school, she was treated like a celebrity by some students and avoided by others, whose parents were uncomfortable with the attention she had brought to their town. Mrs. Patterson, the principal, worked hard to make Maya feel welcome and safe. Extra security was hired for the school, and counselors were brought in to help students process the traumatic events they had witnessed. But it was Maya's own resilience that impressed everyone the most. Despite the chaos surrounding her, she maintained her focus on what mattered most: her education, her family, and her determination to make Millbrook a better place for everyone. "I don't want other kids to go through what I went through," she told a children's magazine that featured her story. "I want this town to be the kind of place where everyone feels welcome." 3 weeks after the incident, a rally was organized in Millbrook's town square. Civil rights organizations, religious groups, and concerned citizens from across the state gathered to show support for Maya's family and demand changes in how the town was governed. The turnout was impressive, with nearly 1,000 people filling the small square. John Cena and The Rock returned for the event, but they insisted that Maya be the main speaker. Standing behind a podium that had to be adjusted for her height, Maya looked out at the crowd with remarkable composure for someone her age. Her parents stood proudly behind her, along with Pastor Williams and Detective Martinez. "I was scared when I first moved here," Maya began, her voice carried by speakers throughout the square. "I thought maybe I was different, maybe I didn't belong. But I learned something important that day at school. We all belong here. All of us." She paused, looking directly at a group of counter-protesters who had gathered at the edge of the crowd. Some held signs supporting Razor and his gang, while others simply glared with undisguised hostility. "To the people who don't want me here," Maya continued, "I understand that change is scary. But hate is scarier, and I'm not going anywhere." The crowd erupted in applause, but Maya wasn't finished. "This is my home now," she declared, "and I'm going to make it better for everyone, whether they like it or not." 6 months later, Millbrook looked like a different town. The change hadn't come easily or without resistance, but Maya's courage had planted seeds that were finally beginning to bloom throughout the community. The most visible transformation was in the town's leadership. Mayor Hartley, facing mounting pressure and a recall petition, signed by over half the registered voters, resigned in disgrace. His replacement was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a pediatrician who had moved to Millbrook 5 years earlier and had witnessed firsthand the discrimination facing minority families. The police department underwent a complete overhaul. Sergeant Rick Peters was arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges. Chief Morrison, who had overseen years of ignored complaints, was forced into early retirement. Detective Martinez accepted the position of interim chief and immediately implemented new training protocols focused on community policing and bias awareness. "We're not just changing policies," Detective Martinez explained at a town hall meeting. "We're changing culture. Every officer in this department will understand that their job is to protect and serve everyone, regardless of their race, religion, or background." The legal proceedings against Razor and his gang concluded with lengthy prison sentences. Raymond Peters himself received 15 years for assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy to commit hate crimes. His accomplices received shorter sentences, but were also banned from returning to Millbrook upon their release. Most surprisingly, the German shepherds that had been trained as weapons of hate found new lives as therapy dogs. The animal rescue organization that took them worked for months to retrain the animals, removing the aggression that had been beaten into them and nurturing their natural loyalty and intelligence. One of the dogs, renamed Hope by her new family, now worked with disabled children at a therapy center in the next county. The other, called Courage, served as a companion animal for elderly residents at a nursing home. Their transformation from instruments of hate to sources of healing became a powerful symbol of the changes possible when people committed to doing better. Maya's family also found their place in the transformed community. David's skills as a mechanic were recognized when the town's garage owner, impressed by his work ethic and expertise, offered him a partnership in the business. Jennifer left her job at the diner to open a small bakery that quickly became a gathering place for people from all backgrounds. But it was Maya herself who had changed the most. The frightened girl, who once stood alone on the playground, had become a confident young leader who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. She started a club at school called Voices for Change, where students could discuss problems in their community and brainstorm solutions. The club grew from 5 members to over 50, including children from every grade level. Maya taught us that we don't have to wait until we're grown up to make a difference, explained Tommy Martinez, a 6th grader whose initial skepticism had transformed into admiration. "If she can stand up to those bikers, we can stand up to bullies in our own school." The club's first major project was organizing a diversity festival for the town. Students researched the cultural backgrounds of Millbrook's residents and discovered a rich tapestry of heritage that had been largely ignored. The festival celebrated everything from Maya's African-American traditions to the Mexican heritage of the Rodriguez family, the Italian customs of the Marconi family, who ran the pizza shop, and the Native American history of the land itself. John Cena and The Rock returned for the festival, but this time they came not as rescuers, but as honored guests celebrating alongside a community that had rescued itself. What Maya did wasn't just about one moment of courage. John told the crowd gathered in the town square, which was now decorated with flags representing dozens of different cultures. It was about sustained bravery, the courage to stay, to fight, to believe that people could change. Dwayne, standing next to a booth selling Jennifer Johnson's famous sweet potato pies, nodded in agreement. She could have let that incident define her as a victim. Instead, she chose to define herself as a victor. And look what happened. The festival drew visitors from across the state, bringing tourism revenue that helped fund new community programs. A scholarship fund was established in Maya's name to help minority students attend college. A community center was planned that would provide after-school programs and job training for residents of all ages. Not everyone embraced the changes. Some longtime residents moved away, uncomfortable with the town's new diversity and openness. Others grumbled about political correctness and complained that Millbrook was losing its traditional character. But they were increasingly outnumbered by people who saw the transformation as progress. New families moved to Millbrook specifically because of its reputation as a community that had confronted its demons and emerged stronger. Pastor Williams, whose small congregation had grown dramatically as people of faith sought a place to worship that welcomed everyone, reflected on the changes during his Sunday sermon. A year ago, we were a town living in darkness, afraid to speak truth, allowing evil to flourish in our silence, he preached. Today, we are a beacon of light, showing the world what's possible when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. Maya, now 10 years old and in 5th grade, still faced challenges. Not everyone in town welcomed her presence, and she occasionally encountered whispers and stares from people who blamed her for the upheaval in their community. But she had learned something powerful that day on the playground. Fear only had as much power as she chose to give it, and she chose to give it none. Her bedroom walls were covered with letters from children around the world who had heard her story and been inspired to stand up against bullying in their own communities. She read every letter carefully and tried to respond to as many as possible. People think what happened that day was about John Cena and The Rock fighting the bad guys. Maya wrote to a 10-year-old boy in California who was being bullied for his accent. But it really started with me finding my voice. You have a voice too. Use it. The story of Millbrook became a case study in universities across the country, examining how communities could confront institutional racism and create lasting change. Sociologists, criminologists, and community organizers studied the transformation, trying to understand what made it successful when so many similar efforts had failed. The answer, most experts agreed, lay in the combination of factors that had aligned that day. The courage of a child, the intervention of unlikely heroes, the power of modern media to expose injustice, and most importantly, the willingness of decent people to finally say enough. But Maya herself had a simpler explanation when reporters asked her to reflect on the events that had changed her life and her town. "Bullies want you to be afraid and alone," she said, standing in the same playground where her nightmare had begun and her heroism had first emerged. But when you stand up and other people stand with you, the bullies become the ones who are afraid and alone. As the sun set over Millbrook, casting the same golden light that had illuminated the town on that fateful day months earlier, Maya Johnson walked home with her head held high. She was no longer the frightened girl who stood alone by the fence. She was a young woman who had discovered that courage was contagious, that justice was possible, and that even in the smallest towns, one voice raised in truth could change everything. The transformation of Millbrook was complete, but Maya's story was just beginning. She had learned that heroes weren't just people on television or in movies. They were ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when it mattered most. And sometimes, they were 9-year-old girls with rocks in their hands and fire in their hearts.